Along the Feather River in Sutter County, California, the peach orchards run in long, quiet rows. In the spring of 1971, that quiet was broken by a discovery that would horrify the nation. On May 19, 1971, a farmer working near Yuba City noticed something strange in his orchard. A freshly dug hole, roughly the size of a grave. When he returned that same night, the hole had been filled back in. He reported it, and investigators came to dig. What they unearthed would unfold, grave by grave, over the following days. In total, 25 bodies were recovered from the orchards along the river. The murders had occurred between February 1st and May 21st, 1971. All 25 victims were male, most of them transient laborers, men who traveled from farm to farm looking for work, men whose absences were easy to overlook. All had been stabbed, aside from one victim who had been shot in the head. The scale of it was staggering. This was, at the time, one of the largest series of murders in American history, and the men buried in those orchards were among society's most vulnerable, drifters and day laborers, whose lives had often gone unrecorded until the moment they were pulled from the ground. As investigators worked through the graves, the physical evidence began to point in a single direction. Inside some of the graves, they found receipts from the Yuba City market, dated 4 days before the discovery and signed by Juan V. Corona. In 2 of the graves, police recovered crumpled Bank of America deposit slips, printed with Corona's name and address. Juan Vallejo Corona was a labor contractor. Born February 7, 1934, in Ayutla, Jalisco, Mexico, he was the man who hired and organized crews of workers for the orchards along the Feather River. That role put him in contact with exactly the kind of men who had ended up in the ground. In the early morning hours of May 26, 1971, police arrived at Corona's Yuba City home with a search warrant and arrested him. Inside, investigators seized a collection of items that would become central to the case: 2 blood-stained knives, a machete, a pistol, and blood-stained clothing. They also took a work ledger, a list of 34 names and dates. Among those names were 7 of the known victims. The evidence painted a chilling picture of a man whose paperwork, tools, and personal effects kept surfacing in connection with the dead. Because of the intense publicity surrounding the case, the trial was moved to Colusa County. There, prosecutors laid out the physical trail, the receipts, the deposit slips bearing Corona's own name and address, the ledger linking him to victims, the blood-stained knives and machete seized from his home. In January 1973, a jury found Juan Corona guilty. He was sent to state prison on February 17, 1973, convicted of the murders of 25 men. It was a conviction that seemed to close one of the most shocking cases in California history. But Corona's story in the courts was not over. Later that same year, in 1973, he barely survived a stabbing attack while incarcerated at the California Medical Facility in Vacaville, an assault that cost him the sight in his left eye. Then, in 1978, an appellate court overturned his conviction. The reason was not innocence, but process. The court found that Corona had received incompetent legal representation, and it granted him a new trial. For a period, the man who had been found guilty of 25 murders stood, legally, as someone awaiting retrial. That retrial came in 1982. Once again, the evidence was presented to a jury, and once again, the outcome was the same. As the Michigan Daily reported, citing the Associated Press on September 24, 1982, a jury convicted Juan Corona at his retrial yesterday of 25 counts of murder. He was found guilty on all counts. This second conviction was never vacated. It fully superseded the 1978 reversal, and it stands as the final adjudicated outcome. Juan Corona was convicted of 25 counts of first-degree murder. He would serve 20 concurrent life sentences. The years that followed were marked by his repeated efforts to win release and by the system's repeated refusal. Corona was denied parole 8 times, after hearings in 1984, 1987, 1990, 1993, 1998, 2003, 2011, and 2016. And at one of those hearings, in 2011, Corona himself removed any remaining ambiguity about what had happened in the orchards. At that parole hearing, Juan Corona admitted that he had murdered and mutilated 25 farm workers because, he said, they were trespassing in the orchards. It was a rare, direct acknowledgement from a man who had spent decades in the machinery of appeals and hearings, and it confirmed in his own words the crimes for which he had twice been convicted. Juan Vallejo Corona died of natural causes at 8:15 a.m. on Monday, March 4, 2019, at an outside hospital. He was 85 years old. At the time of his death, according to California's Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, he was serving 20 concurrent life sentences for 20 counts of first-degree murder. But the case did not close cleanly for everyone. Even now, 4 of the 25 bodies pulled from the peach orchards have never been identified. 4 men, laborers who moved through the fields of California looking for work, remain nameless, their families perhaps never knowing what became of them. That fact is the quiet, unfinished heart of this case. The murders exposed how easily society could lose track of its most transient workers, how a person could vanish into the migrant labor stream and be missed by almost no one. The graves along the Feather River forced a reckoning with that invisibility. Juan Corona was found guilty twice, and he died in custody. But for 4 families somewhere, the identification and the closure that comes with it has still never arrived. If the story of the Feather River orchards teaches anything, it is that no worker, however far he travels and however little he carries, should be so easily forgotten